All right, this is lesson 3.8. This is perpendicular lines, but we're going to start off with a review of 3.7 first. So we were working on the 6 steps. Find an equation of a line. We know we need to find the slope. We need to find the y-intercept. Most of the time they give you the slope. If they do not, you got to look for keywords. So when they say something like parallel, you have to know that parallel lines have the same slope, and then you can write out that same slope in step 2. But besides that, all the steps are the same as you looked at in lesson 3.6. And if you missed lesson 3.6, you should definitely go back and find that video. So for example, if you see y equals 3x plus 4, you know the slope of this line is 3, and therefore the parallel slope would be the same, which is also 3. And you should just check to see that you can understand why all of these are the same answer as well. And my example on the side here, if we had y equals 2x plus 1, I know if it's in slope-intercept form, the number in front of the x is the slope, so it would be 2, and parallel lines have that same slope, so therefore it would also be 2. There was an example just to show you. So instead of saying that the slope is, they're now going to add this phrase in here, and it is parallel to the graph of something like this. So as I'm doing step 1, I would just write down my coordinate as normal. And then in step 2, I'm looking here for the slope. So the slope, that number in front of the x value, and then I can write that out as my new slope. So I would write out this coordinate. I would use m equals 1/2, and then I would do exactly the same as I did in lesson 3.6. Just to show you that, I labeled this point, I wrote out my slope, I substituted in the numbers. Remember, as they're next to each other here, the m and the x, we're going to multiply those two things together, and then we just move this to the other side by doing the opposite. So instead of subtracting 2, I would add 2, giving me 7. Make sure you finish off the question, though. So it's not just 7, it's 1/2 x, that's the first part, and then this 7 is the y-intercept. So by 7, of course, we mean +7. And you should check your answer on Desmos as well. Type in the equation what you think it is. That's this line that you can see here. Also type in the coordinate and just make sure that that coordinate does indeed pass through that line as the question asks you to do so. Warm-up question. I think this is just a little bit of a reminder. And you can practice these questions here, just like we talked about a second ago. Be careful on questions that don't start with y equals. You have to make them start with y equals. So if you put 2 here, that's incorrect because it doesn't say y equals. But if I was to move that 2x to the other side, it would become negative 2x. And then it would start with y equals, and then I can fill in that answer. Question 2, just go ahead and practice those steps that we talked about. Here's the point. The slope is parallel to this. So in other words, parallel to a line of slope 3, meaning it'll also have a slope of 3. And then the same thing for this one, but be careful here. With this starting with 3x plus 2y equals, as opposed to y equals, that means the slope is not 3. You would need to make this say y equals first. Or another very clever way of doing this question, if I just move myself out of the way here, you can actually work out the slope by doing rise over run as well. So if I was to look at this picture here, I can see that it goes down 3 squares and it goes across 2 squares. So actually, I can see that the slope of this line is negative 3 over 2. And, well, I know it's between these two answers here straight away. That would be very helpful to work out. And then once I know the slope and I know this point, I can just use those 6 steps again. There is a couple of exercises if you'd like to practice trying to make this soccer pass here. If you type in what you think the answer is, I can see this is negative slope, and I'm not going to do this particularly accurately. It looks like the y-intercept is 3 as well, so I'm going to type in 3. Oh, perhaps I got this a little bit high. It will draw the line for you so you can see, and then you can change your line a little bit. Clearly, my slope is inaccurate here, but I could work that out by actually finding 2 points that lie on the line here. So down 1, and then across 1, 2, 3. Oops, that's negative 1 over 3. Perhaps I didn't do this as accurately as I should have done. Not quite close enough. Perhaps I'd want to change that a little bit. I could either do this by guessing or I could do this by actually counting the squares more accurately. Ooh, that looks pretty good. And if you do it like that, it will show you what a good pass is. And you can try this one here if you wanted to as well. And that's actually what test 3.3 looks like, finding the slopes of lines. Here are the answers to the questions, and you can look through these at your leisure. There are some steps there as well. Now, at the beginning of each of the lessons, for the last 3 lessons, we've also looked at how do you find this for passing through 2 points. So the main reason is they don't give you the slope. And if they don't give you the slope, you need to work out the slope. So from our previous unit, we talked about labeling 2 coordinates. This is our formula for slope, and then we can plug in the numbers that we see in this question. So I'm just literally looking above each of them. So that's supposed to be a 9. Let me make that a little clearer. X2 here is 2. And X1 is negative 3. So I'll fill in negative 3 here. And I can then type this into Desmos, click on that little fraction line first. Whoops. And then we can get our fraction. So 1 minus 9 over 2 minus -3. And the slope would be, no, I don't think this was the right. Oh, helps if I look carefully here. It says -1. I was going to say that answer does not look familiar to me at all. There we go. Slope is -2. And actually, I can fill that in here. And almost I've done the question now. Write out a coordinate. Step 1, I could pick this coordinate. Step 2, write out the slope. That's what I just worked. And then you just do your 6 steps. If you want to pick this point and use m equals -2, that works equally well as well. It doesn't really matter which one you actually use. Just a reminder, you can type in both coordinates into Desmos and actually count the squares as well. So if you forget the formula, you might have to do this. This goes down 10, so -10, and it goes across 5, so over 5, rise over run. -10 over 5 is -2. And if you can see where this line goes through here, notice I can also see what the y-intercept is here as well. So actually, I could see that the y-intercept is 3. So I know the equation for this line would be -2x plus 3. And if I do it by hand, you can actually see that that is the correct answer as well. So just a reminder, we do one each time, but there the main focus is find a point, find a slope, and then you can use the steps to answer the questions. Now, for perpendicular, to the two things we've got to be able to do, we've got to be able to find the slope and we've got to be able to find the line, kind of like we did for perpendicular. So for parallel, sorry. Now, the difference really is for perpendicular, it's kind of like an X shape. You're looking for a 90-degree angle. I'm just rotating my hands here, so I always have that angle. But you can certainly see these slopes are not the same. One of them is positive and one is negative to begin with. And they're not equal steepnesses. Like this hill here would be very steep, whereas this hill here is clearly nowhere near as steep. So they're not the same number either. And that's what the first section looks at. So the phrase that we're going to use for this class is flip and change. Basically, to remind you, there's two things that you have to do. You have to take the fraction and flip it, and you have to change the sign of a question. So if I knew this slope here is 3, I can see the answer here is -1/3, but let me just show you why. So if it's not a fraction, as we're going to flip it, we want to make it a fraction, so you put it over 1. And then if you flip 3 over 1, you get 1 over 3, but I have to change the sign as well. So as this is positive, I make this answer here negative. Now, the correct mathematical phrase for what we just did here is really negative reciprocal. But I found a lot of students were not familiar with the word reciprocal, but they understood what I mean by flip, as in turn it upside down. So I tend to use flip and change to help students understand exactly what they're going to do. Now, there are some examples here so that you can see. So 2 over 3 is the slope of the black line. So this perpendicular line, if I flip this, I would get 3 over 2, and then change the sign and make it -3 over 2. And if I have this one here, this time the black line is -5 over 4. If I want to know what the slope of the red line is, if it's perpendicular, flip the numbers, ignore the sign for the moment. We're just going to change that. So instead of 5 over 4, 4 over 5, and then change this negative into a positive. We don't have to put the positive anything. If we write it, we know it's automatically positive. I think this is the same one from a second ago, but this black line has a slope of 3. So 3 over 1, flip, 1 over 3, and then change the sign. Change it from positive to negative. Number 4, the black line is 1/2, so flip 2 over 1, change the sign, make it -2 over 1, and then this is where we got to remember, make sure you're simplifying all your fractions just in case. -2 over 1 is -2. That's the answer we will be looking for, not -2 over 1. And the last one, just a reminder for, well, perhaps not a reminder, actually. If it's 0, then the perpendicular slope is going to be this one, which is undefined. So we kind of flip between Hoy and Vux. So with it's 0, we normally use the word Hoy. But as we're in perpendicular, we're going to flip it and we're going to do Vux. So the slope would be undefined. Or if we have undefined, we're going to flip it and have Hoy. Therefore, the slope would be 0. So that special case is one that always kicks in for questions like that. And that's actually what you can see on this slide. And it looks like I might have those two slides slightly in the wrong order, actually. And then there's some questions where you can practice here just to make sure you understand. So 2 over 3, flip it, 3 over 2, change the sign, -3 over 2. This one caused a bit of a problem because there's no fraction. So 5 is 5 over 1, flip it, 1 over 5, change the sign, -1 over 5. And the last one, 1 over 3, flip it, 3 over 1, change the sign, so it's -3 over 1. Once again, make sure you simplify that fraction. It might accept -3 over 1 here, but really you should just be putting -3, and you can still see that it accepts that answer as well. And you can try the other ones as well. Now, to move into the more the aspect of the question we're going to be answering, they're going to say it's parallel to something like this. So you got to know then, oh, the slope of this is 2, but then as it's perpendicular, notice you're going to do a flip and change. So 2 over 1 becomes 1 over 2, and then change the sign, so it becomes negative 1 over 2. So it'll give you a check for this one. It will not give you a check for this line here. So this one's kind of a strange one. When it says x, remember that means 1x. And then 1, as it's a single number, write it as a fraction as 1 over 1. When you flip it, that also becomes 1 over 1 still. Change the sign, negative 1 over 1. And when you work that out, it actually becomes negative 1. So notice you don't get a check for this one, but you do get a check if you got the final one complete. And you can try those ones as well. Now, another question they like to ask us is something parallel, perpendicular, or neither, to make sure that we know those rules. So for parallel, same slope. Perpendicular, flip and change. And if it's neither of those two things, then we're just going to put neither for this. Now, it's helpful when it says y equals because you can see the slope straight away. Sometimes, like this one's fine. You can see the slope immediately. It's a slope of 2. But we have to be aware they might not give us it in slope intercept form, and then we got to make it in slope intercept form. Once it says y equals, then I can figure out the slope. So for this question here, you can see that both slopes are 2. And for that reason, I would actually pick parallel for this question as they're the same slope. It's always advisable to type in the equations just to look, because I think you can almost tell from this picture that this is parallel. What we've got to be careful of, is it parallel or is it just very close to parallel, which is not what we're looking for at all. So algebraic is definitely the better way of doing this question. I did the same thing for this one. These do not say y equals, so I rearranged them so they do say y equals. And then as I look at the slopes here, 3/4 and negative 1/2, clearly they're not the same slope, so this is not parallel. But also, if I was to flip and change on 3/4, I would get negative 4/3, which is not what I have here. So for that reason, I would suggest for this one, neither. And if I look at the graph, I think you can clearly see they're not parallel. And that angle there does not look like a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to say that this one is neither, as I first suggested. And for the last one, first one was done for us. So it already says y equals, so that's good. Second one did not, so I rearranged it. And I got negative 1/4. So if I did a flip and change on 4 over 1 would become 1 over 4. And then if I change the sign, that would be negative. And you can see that is indeed the slope of the second line. So for this one is going to be perpendicular. And you can kind of see from the graph here as well. That looks like a 90-degree angle there, like you'd see in the corner of a rectangle or a square. So I think we got that one correct. There is one that you can practice on as well. And the answers are kind of here just so you can figure that part out. But then make sure you're checking to see which one actually is. Now, one where they're a little sneaky is sometimes they'll do half of a flip and change, and hopefully they'll get you to pick perpendicular, which is not true. So if I if I just flipped on 2 over 1, I would get 1 over 2. And it would be very tempting to want to pick this answer. But no, I didn't do both of the two things. So I would have to select neither for this one. And I think you can see from this clearly, that angle there is definitely not 90 degrees. So this is not perpendicular. So I would always recommend graphing. I think it makes the questions much easier to see. And once again, I think the slides are in the wrong order. I think you were supposed to do that one for yourself first, but hey, I can fix that in a second. It does recommend you log into IXL. You're really only going to go to 50, but 80 is just so people can do a little bit of extra practice. And this will be a part of assignment 3.8. So writing the equations, it's the same steps. The only difference is today, when they give us the slope, we got to check if it says perpendicular. And if it does, we're going to do that flip and change thing. So looking at the example, write the equation in slope intercept form that passes through 10, negative 1. So step 1, write out the coordinate and label it. Step 2, perpendicular to y equals 2x plus 3. So I can see the slope is 2, but this is not parallel. This says perpendicular. So I got to think about what that means. This is the flip and change part. So initially it's 2 over 1. So flip it, 1 over 2. And then you can change the sign, and it's going to become negative 1 over 2. So that's the numbers that I want to use on these steps here. And then the rest of the steps are just like you saw before. Plug in the numbers, work out the answer. But once you finally do have an answer, remember, you want to check to see if this is the correct answer. So one way you can do this is type in the original equation, type in the answer to what you think the question is. And I'm trying to work out the answer to this very quickly. If I did it correctly, I think it might be +6, but we'll see in a second. And then the last step is type in the coordinate that it's supposed to pass through. So the coordinate it's supposed to pass through is 10, negative 1. Now, I can't actually see 10 negative 1 right now, so let me just move this out. It looks like I got this slightly wrong, so perhaps the answer was 8. Let's see if I can fix this. Oh, no, I went the wrong way. 4. There we go. So I'm going to make this point just a little easier to see. Well, I'm going to try and make it a little easier to see. It's a little small right now, so I'm going to change that 8 into 16. There we go. So notice, first of all, the line does go through the point, so that's good. But notice also these lines here are definitely 90 degrees. So I can confirm that the answer to this question is indeed y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4. And this was here just to check for people who were absent. But yes, if I put plus 4 in here and then switch this on, you can see that it does go through and I do get my 90-degree angle. And then those were the steps if you're not sure why the answer actually was 4, using those steps from a previous lesson. There was one for you to try, but you could also actually just go straight to the exercise at this point because that would also be equally good practice. But I did leave a space in where you can try this question if you wish. Sometimes they're going to give you a question where they just give you a point like this, and then a line that goes through this. Now, notice the dotted line that just appeared here. You can see that this is perpendicular. So I know that that's a vertical line, so I know this is a books question, but let's think why that is. So this is a horizontal question, but notice it says perpendicular. So when I flip the hoy, it's going to become a vux, which tells me this is the VUX question. And as it's a vux question, I'm only interested in the x value in this coordinate. So that would be the first one, which is 2. Therefore, I can write down x equals 2. And hopefully you can see the equation of that dotted line is indeed x equals 2. Second one, this is the line I'm trying to find, this dotted line, because it's perpendicular to this line here. So this one is a vux question because this is a vertical line. So when I flip that, that becomes a hoy. So this is a y question. Notice the y value is 3 here. Therefore, that's my equation, y equals 3. And hopefully as that reappears, you can indeed see that is the y equals 3 line because it goes through 3 on the y-axis and it's horizontal. And then our last question, if they want to be particularly mean, instead of giving us information, they might ask us to work it out from a picture. So if they do that, we still want to start off with step 1, write out the coordinate. So look for the x value, look for the y value. So make sure you do that in the right way as well. So this would be the coordinate. If I want to find out the slope of this line, I would have to do like I did in earlier lessons, find 2 points that lie on the line. Here we go. This one goes up 1 and then across 3. So the slope of the red line would be 1/3. My flip and change would make this -3/1, which simplifies to -3. But now I can do my 6 steps. Here's my point, here's my slope, and then you just keep working through the remaining steps to get to that answer. And if you're not prepared to do that yourself, you can just follow this answer here, explaining everything that I just showed as well. So the objectives for today: find the slope of a perpendicular line by doing flip and change, and then find the equation of a line that's perpendicular by doing the flip and change to get the slope, but then using those 6 steps. Use the point they give you, use the slope that you find, and then practicing that method that you've seen previously. And then the assignment you can find in Canvas, or you can actually find on the next slide. Part of it is working on that IXL exercise, and second is practicing some questions where you have to show your steps on paper. And that's it for this video.